Do you believe that a single key could unlock an entire nightmare? At my family's housewarming party, the moment that should have been the happiest. After months of anticipation, my husband's mistress brazenly walked in, the key to my house glinting in her hand. She kissed my husband on the cheek in front of everyone, then threw me a mocking smile. But I didn't erupt in anger. I didn't scream. I simply smiled, poured her a glass of whiskey, and placed an envelope on the table. "Take it all," I whispered, "but remember, some doors once locked will never open again." That was the moment I realized this story would not just be about betrayal. It would be about justice, about how a betrayed woman turned her pain into power, and about how Charlotte Manning made my husband a proud lawyer and his mistress pay for every single lie. Come with me through this journey from the moment my heart was shattered to the cold, undeniable evidence, to the tense courtroom battles, and finally to the freedom I found for myself. Chapter 1. Hooked that evening, I had prepared everything meticulously for the housewarming party. After months of planning, our dream home was finally complete, and I wanted friends and neighbors to come and share this joy with my family. I was busy in the kitchen, arranging trays of food, carefully adjusting each vase of flowers on the tables, my heart filled with hope that the evening would be warm and happy. But then the door swung open, and the person who walked in turned the entire scene into a living nightmare. Leah, my husband's mistress, appeared, her lips curling into a smile that was half mocking, half triumphant. In her hand, glinting under the light, was a key. My house key. She twirled it on her fingertip as if flaunting a trophy, then leaned down to whisper in Jackson's ear, "Still the same lock, my love." The words hissed through her lips, sweet yet venomous, and for a moment the entire room seemed frozen. I stood there, still holding the tray of appetizers, feeling the eyes of everyone, brushing over me, heavy with awkwardness. My husband forced a strained smile, but Leah showed not the slightest hint of shame. She pressed a kiss against his jawline, right there in front of all our guests. I saw a few of my close friends stunned in disbelief, while the neighbors pretended to stare into the wine glasses in their hands. In that moment, another woman might have screamed, might have shattered a glass to release her fury. But I didn't. I smiled. A calm, steady smile so composed it surprised even me. I walked closer, poured Leah a glass of whiskey, and gently placed it before her. Then, from the pocket of my dress, I drew out a white envelope, set it neatly on the table, and slid it toward her. "Take it all," I said, my voice low but clear. "But remember this. Some doors once locked will never open again." Leah arched an eyebrow, her smirk faltering for a brief moment before it quickly returned with defiance. Jackson looked at me, his eyes a mixture of confusion and caution. But my resolve was already sealed. That night I knew I hadn't just lost a husband. I had discovered something far more important. I had just reclaimed myself. Chapter 2. The Past and the Discovery of Infidelity. You may wonder why I seemed so calm in the face of Leah's brazen display. The truth is that calmness didn't appear out of nowhere. It was forged from an afternoon. I will never forget the day. The truth exploded before my eyes, shattering the trust I had once given my husband so completely. That day had begun like any ordinary Tuesday. I left my book club meeting earlier than planned because Margaret, my friend, had to cancel and take her granddaughter to a play. I thought to myself, why not head home a little early, cook Jackson's favorite lasagna, open a bottle of wine, and give us a quiet evening together, the kind we hadn't had in so long. After 23 years of marriage, I believe sometimes it was the simplest gestures that could mend what was slowly breaking. But the moment I stepped into the house, a strange feeling crept over me. Jackson's car was still parked in the driveway, yet the house was far too silent. No tapping on the keyboard from his office, no familiar clinking sounds from the garage where he often tinkered with his motorcycle. I called his name softly, climbing the stairs, my heart light with anticipation that perhaps he was napping. And then I heard voices. Jackson's voice, low, intimate, coming from our very own bedroom. You know I can't just leave her right away. There are the kids, the house. Everything's so complicated. I froze my hand gripping the banister until my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded violently, each beat threatening to tear through my chest. Then came another voice, a woman's. Soft, alluring, but to me, in that moment, it was as sharp as a blade. When has love ever been simple, darling? You said it yourself. She doesn't really see you anymore. Not the way I do. Leah. Her name struck me like a flash of lightning. The yoga instructor from the fitness center. The one who had once complimented my dress at the church fundraiser. The woman I'd exchanged polite smiles with more than once. The woman I never imagined was the shadow creeping into my marriage. I stood motionless, pressed against the hallway wall, my ears burning as I caught every word they exchanged. Jackson spoke of me as if I were just a kind woman, the one who looked after the children, cared for his mother when she was ill, but was no longer the woman he desired. His voice sounded so alien, as if he were describing a stranger. What cut deepest was the bitter irony threaded through his words. For years I had poured myself into our family, set aside my own dreams, abandoned my passion for painting, so that he could pursue his career as a lawyer without distraction. I thought that was how I showed love, but to him all of it had only turned me into the perfect wife, too boring. I remember in that moment what filled me wasn't just pain. It was shock rage, and above all, a cold emptiness. I realized then that our 23-year marriage had been fractured for a long time. I had just been too busy patching it together to see it clearly. That night, I lay awake, restless. Jackson came home late, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirt. I didn't ask, I didn't confront him. I simply listened to his breathing in the dark and knew that I had lost a husband, but I was about to find a new version of myself, stronger, sharper, and unflinching. From that moment on, Leah's sugary act at the housewarming party no longer shook me, because I already knew. I had seen it all, and all I was waiting for was the right moment to step out of the role of the submissive wife they thought I would always be. Chapter 3. Awakening and the decision to act from the afternoon. I overheard that conversation in the bedroom. I began to see everything around me with different eyes. Every time Jackson smiled at me, I no longer felt the warmth of a lifelong partner. I only saw the lies he was hiding behind that gaze. Every time he excused himself with a business trip or a late meeting, I no longer believed it was duty. I imagined instead the secret rendezvous with Leah. There were nights when he came home with his shirt wrinkled, his body carrying a scent of perfume I knew for certain was not mine. I lay still, my back turned to him, my heart aching, but my eyes dry. I no longer cried. My tears had long since run dry after countless sleepless nights. And then one evening, when I saw Leah standing in my living room, casually twirling that house key in her hand, as if it were jewelry, I knew I had reached my limit. I was no longer the naive woman who believed patience could preserve a home. I had moved beyond the pain and found something entirely new. It wasn't anger anymore, nor sorrow. It was clarity. In that moment, I realized I could not go on living in a sham of a marriage one day longer. If Jackson thought I would continue to look away, if Leah believed my silence was submission, then they were both mistaken. I was no longer the woman I had been for years, circling the kitchen, worrying about meals and neatly pressed shirts. I would be the woman who seized the pen to rewrite her own destiny. I walked into the kitchen, set the tray of food down, and opened my handbag. Inside was the phone I had picked up and put down countless times, hesitating, too afraid to call. In my contacts sat a name I had saved months ago, one restless night at 3 a.m, when suspicion gnawed at me, but I lacked proof. James Morrison, the divorce attorney who had once helped my sister. My fingers slid across the screen, my heart racing, but not from fear. For the first time in months, I felt control in my hands. I pressed call. James Morrison speaking. His voice was deep, steady. James, this is Charlotte Manning. I think it's time we talked. There was a brief silence. Then he replied with firm certainty. "I've been expecting this call for a long time, Mrs. Manning. Monday 9 a.m. Can you be at my office?" I inhaled deeply, the corner of my lips curving into a faint smile. "Yes, I'll be there." When I hung up, a surge of power coursed through me. It felt as though I had stepped through a new door, leaving behind the submissive woman and emerging as a different Scarlet, clear-eyed, unyielding, and ready to fight. I knew my husband and his mistress believed they had won. But they would soon learn the truth, what they had most underestimated. My silence was, in fact, my sharpest weapon, and I had just begun to draw it from its sheath. Chapter 4. Gathering Evidence. Once I had called James and scheduled the appointment, I knew I couldn't walk into the lawyer's office empty-handed. If I wanted to win, I needed proof. Not just suspicions, not just tears poured into a story. I needed evidence that could not be denied. The next morning, I saw Jackson off just like any other day. He said he had an early meeting with a client. I smiled, nodded, watched him drive through the gates, then waited another half hour to be sure. When his car finally disappeared from sight, I began my real plan. My first stop was his home office. Jackson always prided himself on being meticulous in his work, but I discovered he was strangely careless when it came to hiding personal secrets. In the third drawer, beneath a thick stack of files, I found a pile of credit card statements. My eyes caught on expenses that didn't match any story he'd ever told. Lavish dinners at upscale restaurants I had never set foot in, hotel receipts from nearby towns that coincided perfectly with days he had claimed to be golfing with colleagues. I took out my phone and photographed every page, every number. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the rage that had crystallized into strength. Each snapshot felt like an arrow, and I knew that in court they would pierce straight through his denials. Jackson's laptop, too, wasn't as well protected as I had believed. I guessed he was too arrogant, certain I would never dare invade his private space. But I did, and what I found made my blood run cold. Hundreds of emails starting with playful flirtations, gradually escalating into intimate conversations, arrangements for dates, and finally blunt messages about their secret encounters. I read line after line, trembling yet smirking bitterly. One message from Jackson read, "Charlotte doesn't pay attention to me anymore. She's too busy being the perfect housewife. Sometimes I think even if she found out, she wouldn't care." I paused, exhaling a long breath. Perhaps he truly believed I was blind, that my silence equaled indifference. But he had no idea those contemptuous words had become the fuel for my determination. I backed up everything, emailed copies to myself, and saved another set on a USB drive. But I wasn't done. I needed living proof, evidence impossible to refute, even if he tried to deny it. The next day, when Jackson claimed he had a long day of work ahead, I quietly followed him. As I suspected, he didn't go to the office. Instead, he drove to Riverside Park, the very place where 24 years ago he had proposed to me, where our most beautiful memory had once been sealed. And there I saw him sitting with Leah, holding her hand, kissing her on the very bench where he had once knelt and slipped a ring onto my finger. I sat in my car, clutching the camera I had purchased only the day before. I had been preparing for this moment. With a telephoto lens, I captured everything in perfect detail, their fingers entwined, their giddy smiles, their unabashed kiss. Each click of the shutter was a knife, twisting into my memories, but I kept pressing, because I knew these were no longer just my wounds. They were evidence. A few days later, an unexpected gift arrived from Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor. Over coffee, she leaned closer and whispered, "Charlotte, are you all right? Lately, I've seen a young woman coming to your house quite often. When you're not there, I think she has a key." I kept my voice steady, though my heart clenched. So Leah hadn't just flaunted that key at the party. She had actually been using it, coming and going freely, in the very house I had poured my heart into. I asked Mrs. Henderson to note down specific dates and times, and she agreed with a sympathetic nod. I knew her testimony would be another crucial piece in the picture I was assembling. That night, I quietly installed a recording app on my phone and slipped it beneath Jackson's desk. Sure enough, it didn't take long before I captured a conversation between him and Leah. Jackson's voice was low, resolute. I've started moving money into a separate account. Charlotte's never looked at the bank statements, so she'll never know. Once everything's ready, I'll leave with you. I listened to that recording again and again, each time torn between pain and relief. He had betrayed not just my love, but the financial trust I'd placed in him. Yet instead of crumbling, I felt stronger. I had everything now. The receipts, the emails, the photographs, the witness, and now the recording. Sitting alone in the kitchen, I stared at the pile of evidence I'd gathered. Each document, each photo, each audio file was a shard of truth exposing the reality of Jackson and Leah. I felt as though I was assembling not just a divorce case, but an indictment for betrayal. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt a strange peace. I knew this battle wouldn't be easy, that Jackson would fight back with everything he had. But I also knew I was ready. They thought I was weak. They thought I would remain silent, but I now held something they never expected, the truth. And the truth would be the weapon that destroyed them both. Chapter 5. Preparing for the confrontation. In the days that followed, I lived like an actress on stage. By day, I still cooked meals, still smiled, still asked my husband about his work. By night, when he was fast asleep, I sat silently in the living room, arranging every piece of evidence like a detective. The photographs I had printed were neatly placed into envelopes. The receipts, statements, and recordings were categorized and marked. I wanted to make sure that when I exposed him, there would not be a single crack left for him to deny. Sometimes I looked into the mirror and saw a completely different Scarlet staring back. No longer the submissive woman, the one who sacrificed and stayed silent, but a woman holding the truth in her hands, waiting for the perfect moment to strike the fatal blow. James Morrison called his voice steady. "You've done very well. With this much evidence, we will have an absolute advantage." I nodded, gripping the phone tightly in my hand. But I wasn't in a rush. I wanted Jackson and Leah to remain in their false confidence a little longer. I wanted the moment of truth to be the moment that left them with no way out. I chose the family dinner, a dinner where both my son and daughter would be present. A dinner that had once been the symbol of family unity would now become a courtroom where I would be the judge and Jackson would face the true verdict of his life. Chapter 6. The Family Dinner. Public Exposure. That evening, my family gathered around the dinner table. It had been a long time since we'd shared a meal like this. My son David had just come home from university. My daughter Emma had taken a break from her small apartment in the city where she worked. I set the table with my usual care roast chicken stewed vegetables, the salad the kids loved, and a bottle of red wine placed at the center. On the surface, it looked like the perfect family dinner. But inside me, waves were crashing, because tonight wasn't an ordinary dinner. Tonight would be the end of Jackson's illusions, and the night I reclaimed my voice. Throughout the meal, Jackson kept glancing at his phone. It buzzed over and over, the screen lighting up with a name only I recognized, Leah. He fumbled trying to appear casual, then muttered excuses about urgent client calls as he slipped away from the table. Each time, though, David and Emma exchanged looks, quiet knowing. They were no longer children. They could feel something was wrong. Emma set her fork down, her voice soft but steady. "Dad, is something going on at work? You've been so busy lately, always on the phone." Jackson forced a strained smile. "It's nothing, just a few cases to handle. Nothing for you to worry about." But David wasn't convinced. He looked straight at his father, his eyes cold, so much like mine when I was his age. "Dad, I've seen Mom upset these past weeks. Are you sure there's nothing else?" I looked at my son, my heart tightening. But in that moment, my resolve hardened further. I set my fork down, dabbed my lips gently with a napkin, and spoke. My voice was calm, but each word dropped like a stone. "Actually, there is something your father and I need to tell you." Jackson flinched, whipping his head toward me. His eyes widened with panic, as if he already sensed what was coming. "Scarlet, maybe we should "No, Jackson," I cut him off firm. "They're old enough. They deserve to know the truth." I left the room and returned moments later with a thick envelope in hand. I placed it in the center of the table among the steaming dishes and the half-poured wine. Silence fell. Emma's eyes widened as she stared at it. David frowned, his instincts telling him the contents would change everything. I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers and photographs one by one. "Your father," I said, my voice still eerily steady, "has been involved with another woman. For the past 8 months, they've met in hotels, restaurants, and even in this very house." I slid the stack toward them. On top were the bank statements, regular transfers to a strange account. Next came restaurant bills, hotel invoices. Then the photographs Jackson and Leah hand in hand at Riverside Park, the very place where he had once proposed to me. Emma covered her mouth, tears spilling. "Dad, that's the park where you proposed to Mom." David's fists, clenched veins standing out on his neck. He flipped through the rest-printed emails, contemptuous messages. When he reached the line, "Scarlet doesn't pay attention to me anymore. She lives in her own fantasy world," his face flushed with fury. "You called Mom delusional." His voice cracked with rage. Jackson raised his hands, desperate. "You don't understand. This marriage has been dead for years. Leah and I just found a connection your mother no longer gives me." "A connection," Emma's voice broke as she shouted. "By betraying Mom, by destroying this family." Jackson turned to me, scrambling to regain control. "Scarlet, you're poisoning the children against me. This isn't the way." I let out a cold laugh, a smile with no warmth. I drew out the final paper, the signed divorce petition complete with custody and asset division filings. I laid it before him. "This isn't theater, Jackson. This is evidence filed with the court this morning. And do you know what's worse? Our children have seen everything. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed this family." At that exact moment, Jackson's phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with the all-too-familiar name, Leah. David snatched the phone-pressed answer and spoke with an icy edge. "Hello, Leah. This is Jackson's son. I just wanted to let you know. My mother has filed for divorce, and my father is about to lose everything. Congratulations, you've just become the most expensive mistake of his life." The table fell silent. Jackson's face went pale. "You have no right," he shouted. David set the phone down firmly, his voice cold. "I have every right. Because you're the one who destroyed everything." Emma looked at her father, her eyes brimming with heartbreak. "I can't see you the same way anymore. You taught me marriage was about trust. And tonight you've taught me it was all a lie." She rose from her seat, tears streaming, and walked out. David followed, but before leaving, he turned back, his eyes blazing. "You're no longer the man of this family. To me, you're just the one who broke Mom's heart." The door slammed shut behind them, leaving only Jackson and me in the heavy silence. He looked at me, desperation in his eyes. "Scarlet, you can't do this. We can fix this. We can..." I stared straight into his eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt no trembling, no fear, no Jackson. We've been over for a long time. You were just too cowardly to admit it. That dinner, the dishes remained half-eaten, the wine glasses half full. But my family had just gone through its judgment day, and I knew the courtroom beyond these walls was now just a formality. Because the most important battle I had already won right here in my own home. Chapter 7, The Courtroom Battle. After that fateful dinner, there was nothing left to hide. Jackson knew I had every piece of evidence in my hands, and he also knew I was no longer the submissive woman I once had been. But instead of admitting fault, instead of trying to mend what he had broken, he chose to fight to the bitter end. One morning, I received a thick envelope from the courier. Inside was a counter-petition from Jackson. He had hired Hartwell Briggs & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. They demanded half of the assets' custody of the children, and even suggested I return a fair portion to him. Fairness. I laughed dryly. The man who betrayed his wife, siphoned money from his children's tuition fund, now demanded fairness. James Morrison, my lawyer, only shrugged as he read through the file. Expensive doesn't mean victorious, Charlotte. Not when he's left so many loose ends. I saw the certainty in his eyes, and it steadied me. On the first day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom in a simple navy dress. Not to impress, but to remind myself I didn't need grandeur. The truth was my strongest weapon. Jackson sat across the room in his expensive suit, his hair slicked back, but his face betrayed tension. At his side was Marcus Hartwell, a lawyer notorious for twisting cases in his client's favor. Hartwell began with a confident flourish. Your Honor, Mr. Jackson Manning is a devoted husband and father. Yes, their marriage had cracks, but that does not diminish his dedication to his children. He is simply seeking new happiness, something every human being has the right to pursue. I listened, and disgust welled inside me. New happiness by destroying a family and lying for months. When it was James's turn, he didn't bother with flourishes. He simply opened a thick file and laid out the evidence piece by piece. Your Honor, James said firmly, we have bank statements proving that Mr. Jackson Manning withdrew tens of thousands of dollars from his children's tuition fund to finance trips with his mistress. We have hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and photographs of Mr. Manning openly displaying affection with Ms. Leah Patterson while still living with his wife. And most importantly, he paused, holding up a stack of printed pages. We have email records showing that Mr. Manning not only betrayed his wife, but ridiculed her, calling her blind, living in her own fantasy world. This is not the pursuit of happiness. This is systematic deceit. The courtroom fell silent. I looked at Jackson. His face hardened, his hands clenched so tightly the knuckles blanched. And that was only the beginning. James continued, we also present an audio recording in which Mr. Manning admits to transferring funds into a private account with his own words. Charlotte never checks the bank statements, so she won't know. This is deliberate financial concealment. The recording played Jackson's voice echoing clearly through the room. He bowed his head while Hartwell flushed red with embarrassment. I thought that was enough, but the most striking blow came from the final witness, Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor. She stepped up to the stand, her voice slow but unwavering. I saw a young woman visiting the Manning house multiple times when Mrs. Charlotte was away. She had a key. She didn't just visit. I saw her bring suitcases, clothing, even small pieces of furniture. From my observation, she seemed to be preparing to move into that home. The courtroom stirred with murmurs. I lifted my chin high. Just as I had hoped, the truth was not only written on paper but spoken through the eyes of witnesses. Hartwell tried to counter. He spoke of a marriage long dead, claiming Jackson had merely sought something new. But James swiftly dismantled it with irrefutable evidence. Family photos, our 20th wedding anniversary picture, even the receipt for the purchase of our new house just a year prior. Your Honor, James concluded, if this marriage had been dead for years, why did Mr. Manning do all of this? The truth is he wanted both the security of a family to uphold his reputation and the thrill of an affair to gratify himself. That is not the pursuit of happiness. That is pure selfishness. When the hearing ended, I left the courtroom with a strange peace in my heart. I knew the battle wasn't over, that there were more hearings ahead, but today I had watched Jackson stripped bare before the judge, and that was enough to assure me the scales of justice were tipping in my favor. Jackson exited through the other door, his face twisted in rage. He turned to me, hissing with venom. You'll regret this, Charlotte. This isn't the end. I met his gaze, calm, a faint smile touching my lips. You're right, Jackson. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of your downfall. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The Fall of Jackson and Leah. That day in court was only the beginning, but it was enough to shatter the mask Jackson had worn for so long. He was no longer the image of the devoted husband, the dedicated father. He had been revealed to the public for what he truly was, a liar, a cheat, and a betrayer. In the days that followed, I began to witness the slow but irreversible collapse of both Jackson and Leah. Jackson, once so proud of his career as a lawyer, found his own colleagues turning against him. Emma's friend told me that during meetings, clients had started asking, if a man can't be honest with his wife, can he really be honest in his work? That question spread faster than any defense his firm could muster. Before long, he was forced out. The man who once strutted in, pressed suits, and sat in a polished office now wandered in vain searching for work. And Leah, the so-called new woman Jackson once treasured, now had to face a community that knew the truth. She had been a yoga instructor, always preaching balance and ethics. But when the truth came out, her students left in droves. Her colleagues kept their distance. No one wanted to stand beside a homewrecker. I heard she begged to keep her classes sobbing, but the management had no choice but to cut her contract. One afternoon, Mrs. Henderson stopped by my house again. She leaned in and whispered, "Charlotte, that young woman came looking for Jackson but couldn't find him. She looked terrible hair, disheveled dark circles under her eyes. She said Jackson had disappeared, stopped answering her calls, and offered no help at all." I listened, but there was no surge of fury this time. Only emptiness. The same woman who once flaunted my house key was now standing outside in tears, begging for scraps of information about the man she had once trusted. I did not pity her. I only saw justice, because what Leah was facing was simply the consequence of her choices. She chose to intrude into another woman's marriage. She chose to make peace with deceit. And now, stripped of Jackson, of her job, of her community, all she had left was herself and her loneliness. Jackson fared no better. After losing his job, he rented a shabby apartment downtown, just one small room with a hot plate and a shared bathroom. One day, David came home and told me Dad asked me for a loan to put down a deposit on a new place. I said no. I looked at my son and saw no anger in his eyes anymore, only disappointment. He added, "I think Dad's learning a lesson he never thought he'd have to learn, the lesson of loss." I nodded. Yes. Jackson had believed himself smarter than everyone else, thought he could control everything, thought he could keep both his family and his mistress. But in the end, he lost it all. Not just money, not just status, but the respect of his children. And me, I felt lighter than I ever had before. I hadn't needed to take revenge by screaming in their faces. I hadn't needed to do anything but let the truth speak for itself. Evidence, the courtroom, and time had done all the work for me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I recalled that moment when Leah dangled the key before me. That image had once made me tremble with pain, but now I smiled, because that key no longer opened any door. Not this house, not this family, not my life. And in the ruins of Jackson and Leah, I found the rebirth of myself. Chapter 9. The Ending. Closure and Empowerment. 6 months after everything ended, I realized I had stepped into a new chapter of my life. The house that had once been a battlefield had become a sanctuary of peace. No more sleepless nights waiting for the sound of the door. No more mornings finding strange lipstick stains on my husband's collar. I woke up to silence, and for the first time in years, that silence wasn't frightening. It was freedom. Jackson had disappeared from my circle of life. After the court's ruling, he had lost nearly everything. The colleagues who once praised him turned their backs. Clients no longer trusted him, and eventually the law firm had no choice but to dismiss him. I heard he now lived in a small, shabby apartment, a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. Emma once told me her father had called his voice shaky, complaining that Leah had left him, leaving him alone with mounting debts. She only sighed. What did he expect from a woman willing to destroy someone else's family? As for Leah, the woman who once walked into my life with a defiant smile and my house key dangling in her hand, she had vanished from the city. After losing her job and being shunned by the community, she no longer had a place here. I heard she moved far away to start over, but I didn't care anymore. Where she lived, what she did, whom she loved, none of it had any bearing on me. What brought me the greatest relief was realizing I no longer felt anger. I once believed that only when Jackson paid the price, only when Leah collapsed would I feel satisfied. But the truth was different. True satisfaction came when I felt indifferent, when I could hear their names without my chest tightening, when I could look back at shattered memories without wanting to cry. One morning, I decided to change the locks on the house. As the locksmith turned the final key, I suddenly remembered the moment Leah had flaunted that old key at the housewarming party. Back then, she thought she had one thought: she had the right to come and go in my life as she pleased. But now I stood there smiling, tossing the old set of keys into the trash. The new door was closed, and this time it would only open to those who truly belonged in my family. That evening, Emma and David came home. They hugged me, shared stories about their jobs, their lives. They no longer saw me as just the mother who stood behind the kitchen counter. They saw me as a strong woman, one who had the courage to stand up and demand justice. I saw pride in their eyes, and I knew that was the greatest victory I had ever won. I had no regrets. 23 years of marriage had ended, but it hadn't stripped me of my worth. On the contrary, it revealed a strength I never knew I had. I had lived most of my life for others, for my husband, for my children, for the image of a perfect family. But now I live for myself. I no longer dreamed of Jackson's remorse, nor did I wait for Leah's downfall. Because the most important truth was this: I had risen above them. They once thought they could define me through their betrayal, but I had redefined myself through resilience. And as I sat by the window, watching the sunset fall over the garden I had tended with my own hands, I smiled. Life was still beautiful, still wide open, and now it was mine. There is a saying I hold close to my heart: some doors once locked will never open again. Jackson and Leah were those doors. They no longer had a place in my life. I had locked them behind me, and I would never turn back. My story is not about loss, but about liberation. Not about betrayal, but about freedom. And if anyone were to ask me how I won, I would say I won by standing up, walking away, and never looking back. That is my story. From a wife who was dismissed and betrayed, I stood up, gathered every shred of evidence, and turned them into blades that severed the chains of a false marriage. Jackson lost everything. Leah vanished from my life, and I found peace. What truly matters is not how they fell, but how I rose. I did not take revenge with tears or bitterness. I took revenge with the truth, with justice, and by living a new life, one where they no longer had any place. If you too believe that no betrayal can ever bury the strength of a woman, leave a comment below and share your thoughts with me. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories from Scarlet Vows, where we tell journeys of heartbreak truth and the sweetest victories.